Thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. It's early your time, so we appreciate it. So maybe before we begin, would you like to give us a brief introduction of BioNTech? I mean, now it's a household name. Everyone in the world probably knows it very well, but maybe just a bit of introduction about, when it first started in 2008 and its research strength over the years.
Absolutely. So thanks again for the invitation. Happy to be with you. So you're right. BioNTech was founded now 13 years ago in 2008 as a spin out of the University of Mainz. Founded and still led today by Uğur Şahin, who was a tumor immunologist. And so our initial starting point was a focus on cancer. And the vision of the company early on was how can we individualize cancer treatment? And we worked with a number of different therapeutic platforms, mRNA being one of them, where we became a leader in mRNA, but also worked in cell therapies and other, even with antibodies, small molecules, so broad technology set. But I think over the years, we've optimized this mRNA platform in particular. And early this year, when the COVID epidemic started, we pivoted and we really put a lot of resources and our technology to use to try to find a cure.
So in the crafting of this mRNA vaccine with Pfizer, tell us a bit more about how this partnership came about.
So we've been partners already with Pfizer going back to 2018. Our first collaboration, actually infectious diseases, was based on developing an mRNA vaccine for seasonal flu with Pfizer. So we already had collaboration in place on the operations side, on the development side, on the manufacturing and formulation side. And so when this pandemic really erupted, I think we made the decision early on that our technology was ready, and we made the decision to start the program. And very soon thereafter, it was actually in March when we announced that that Pfizer was going to join forces with us, and we were really going to take a global approach and put both companies' resources to bear. So I think having the partnership back in 2018 in place beforehand helped us move very quickly. It's that collaboration that certainly contributed to our success, and I think has positioned us as the first vaccine approved in the Western world and one of the most widely distributed today.
Singapore is the first Asian country to receive doses of the BioNTech vaccine. So what do you think the approval of this vaccine for use here in Singapore means for the rest of Southeast Asia or even Asia? Do you foresee more companies coming forward to place advance orders with BioNTech?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think from the very beginning, it was important to us that we distribute our vaccine globally. We wanted to bring the vaccine to all corners of the world, and it's why we set up the broad consortium with Pfizer, also with Fosun Pharma in China. And we have a number of other collaborators as well who are assisting us. So that was always the intention. I think it is a major milestone for us to bring the vaccine to Singapore. We're proud that we were the first company to bring a vaccine to Singapore. And for us, Singapore is an important region. We plan to establish a presence in Singapore going forward. And, the vision of BioNTech is to build a global company. And we have a presence, of course, we have a headquarters in Germany, we have a presence in the United States, and we plan to build a presence in Asia.
Oh, and that's going to be in Singapore?
Singapore will be an important part of our Asian plan.
Okay, so Singapore is known for its biomedical hub here in this region. So just tell us a bit more about that. I mean, compared to the other countries that received doses of the BioNTech vaccine so far, Singapore's market share is just a fraction. I mean, we have like 5.7 million people or so. So do you think its small market share affected, its negotiating powers with the pharmaceutical companies like yours?
Well, Singapore is a small market in and of itself, but we see it as an important part of a broader strategic region for us, namely the neighboring Southeast Asia region, which is a much bigger market from a population standpoint, but also in terms of the unique attributes that we see in Singapore. So that include access to talent across functions. That was an important factor for us in looking at how Singapore could fit into to our Asian strategy. The long history of manufacturing in Singapore, something also that we're looking at very closely. So I think Singapore has a lot of really interesting attributes that make it very attractive as a potential hub for a broader Asian expansion plan.
So the first doses of the vaccine arrived here in December. Do you have any details for when we might receive more doses?
So I can say confidently that we plan to send doses throughout 2021. I think as we're doing across the world, doses will come in installments over time. We're trying to get as many doses as we can out into the world. We're now serving over 50 different countries and regions, and we expect that number to expand rapidly as we go into throughout 2021. So it'll happen over time, and of course we've got a limiting factor here, which is the supply capacity. We are doing everything we can to increase our own capacity. Obviously, Pfizer, our partner, is also doing the same. We will soon have 7 different sites between the two companies producing vaccine in one or another stage of the production process. So I expect that our supply capacity will continue to ramp up throughout the first half of this year. And again, that's the primary focus that we have right now, is to produce more vaccine because we see the demand.
What about scaling up manufacturing capacity here in Asia? I mean, earlier we talked about how mRNA vaccines have emerged ahead of the curve because it's easy to produce and safe to produce. Do you think it's easy to set up a manufacturing site to meet demand, not just here in Asia, but the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's something we're looking at for the longer term, absolutely, as we think about building a global footprint. I think in the near term, for us to address the pandemic, the fastest way for us to scale up production was to focus on our existing facilities and those near our HQ in Germany. And so we did acquire a facility last year that was about 1 hour from our headquarters, and we're working to get that activated. It's not happened yet, but we think we're close. And this is the Marburg facility that I'm talking about. We acquired from Novartis. So our initial plan was the fastest way to produce more vaccine was to scale up at existing sites or sites close to our own, especially with the travel restrictions worldwide. But yes, absolutely, longer term, we're going to look at Singapore as a potential site.
So now that the vaccine has gotten emergency approval in various jurisdictions and countries, and the vaccines are being rolled out, let's come to a topic that's probably on top of many people's minds as they await their turn for a vaccine, which is the safety and efficacy. So the late-stage trials have shown that it was efficacious, right? Over 95% effective at preventing the disease. But what about concerns over the new strains of the coronavirus that has emerged? Just take us through the process. Like, will it still be effective against these new strains?
So we've tested the vaccine against over 20 different strains. We've actually published some data on this earlier, actually last year. And it was effective in preventing, or at least in neutralizing, those other strains that we looked at. So we saw broad spectrum activity, and that's because the antibody response, the immune response that this vaccine produces is diverse. That said, there is a theoretical risk that future variants could actually challenge that. So we're gonna continue to monitor that, and some of the more recent strains that have been widely reported on, we're currently analyzing. We do think that the probability is very high that the current vaccine will still be effective against those strains, but we'll continue to monitor that. And if it turns out that a new strain emerges that is where the vaccine is not protective, I think the technology is very well suited to very quick modifications, and we would be able in a period of weeks to produce a new vaccine variant to potentially address a new strain. So that's something that over the longer term will be an important part of staying on top of COVID-19 and making sure that a mutation doesn't take us backwards, right?
Do you think that it would be possible to vaccinate more people around the world quickly enough so that the virus could be prevented from developing these concerning mutations?
Well, that's certainly the goal. I mean, our goal here is to stop COVID-19 in its tracks as quickly as we can. And that's going to take not only our vaccine, but other vaccines. I think to do that as quickly as possible, we expect that there will be additional vaccines that come into the market, but it's still going to take time, right? And so the faster that we can do that, the faster that global mass vaccination campaigns can be implemented, the better chance we have to really, dramatically halt or slow down transmission rates, stop the pandemic, and at least get into a phase where it's a post-pandemic phase where we may still have outbreaks that occur, but that we'll be able, hopefully, to better control them, and that's the goal, ultimately.
So some countries are also trying out new strategies to stretch out the doses so that they can vaccinate as many people as possible. We've seen various permutations of this in terms of increasing the time spent in between the doses or administering half a dose. The WHO has come up with some clarifications on this, but what is your thoughts on this? In an effort to vaccinate as many people, and all the efforts that are being taken.
We're very data-driven and science-led people. So we like to follow what the data indicate and what the data support. And our view on this is, we've generated a huge body of data already for a vaccine in a 2-dose regimen, 21 days apart for the 2 doses. As you mentioned, 95% efficacy, very low rate of side effects. And when we do see side effects, they tend to be mild to moderate in terms of fatigue or chills or low-grade fever. So I think we're going to stick to what the data shows. We will continue to collect more data as we go. And as you point out, we acknowledge that public health officials are going to have to make their own call depending on the local conditions. And given the severity of this pandemic in certain regions, that in some cases they may make some changes to the protocols beyond what we did in the phase 3. But I think in terms of being led by science, I think we're going to stick to being most confident in the standard 2-dose regimen.
Earlier we talked a bit about the phase 3 data, and you said that in the large-scale trials, very few volunteers reported severe side effects. But as we have seen, when the vaccine was rolled out in other countries, we have seen severe allergic reactions, and people here are concerned. So what would you say to them regarding these anaphylactic reactions?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we have observed, since the vaccination campaigns have commenced, a relatively low rate, but still a rate of severe anaphylactic reactions to the vaccine. These have tended to be in individuals who have a history of severe allergic reactions. And when we say, I think the emphasis here is on the word severe. This isn't, these are people who have had very negative or very strong reactions in the past to drugs, to vaccines, etc. Our clinical trial excluded such individuals. Clinical trials have a defined protocol, and so it's true that we didn't see that signal in the trial data. So I think the important thing now is that we learn from that, and we're taking every measure we can to work with government regulators so that they understand in these vaccination campaigns to take that simple precaution that if people have had a severe anaphylactic reaction previously, that they probably shouldn't get the vaccine.
So, other than this group of people, the trials also didn't include other groups, right? Like people under the age of 16, pregnant women, and immunocompromised persons. So can you just share with us an update about whether any other trials are ongoing to see how these groups of people tolerate the vaccine?
Yeah, so far we've seen very consistent side effect profile effectively in all groups that you've just mentioned. We are still expecting data for pregnant women That data hasn't come in yet. But in terms of age groups, in terms of ethnicity, we've seen a very consistent profile, and it fits with what I said earlier. So low-grade side effects typically, and very tolerable profile overall. So we'll continue to collect more data, right, over the course of this year, and of course have a very rigorous safety monitoring procedure in place for on top of the vaccination campaigns that are ongoing. So we'll continue to monitor that very closely. It's the most important thing to us, that the vaccine is safe, and that and so we feel like we have a duty to really vigorously monitor that. And we'll report data in some of those subgroups that you mentioned over the course of this year.
Okay, thank you so much, Ryan.
Okay, thank you.